Don't forget to like and subscribe to Jolie Knots Crochet. Share with your friends. Hit that little notification bell so you can get notified when new patterns release. All our videos are available in left and right-handed tutorials. Hi everyone, welcome back to Jolie Knots Crochet. I'm Crystal and today we are going to be making this hearts aligned shawl. Now we are going to be making this shawl out of puff stitches and double crochets. We're working from the bottom up. It's super simple. This one that I made measures 76 inches wide from one end to the next, 76 inches, and it's approximately 28 inches long down from the longest point in the middle to the middle of your neck. Okay, now you can go as small or as big as you would like with this shawl. Now this shawl is also lined in hearts going all the way up on each side. So every single row starts with the puff stitch cluster. Every single row starts with the V puff stitch. So these are just V stitches in lines to make it look more like a heart. The yarn that I used was the Lamia Wool Easy, and I used 3 balls of this. This skein's not full all the way because I'm already working on another project with it, but it is the Lamia Wool Easy. It is a 4-weight yarn, 80% acrylic and 20% wool. Now these come in 100-gram skeins, so if you want something similar to the size that I have, you're going to use about 300 grams. 229 yards times 3, about 690 yards, just under 700 yards. I did use all 3 skeins and then had just this little ball left over that I knew I probably wasn't going to get another row out of it. Now you are going to need a tapestry needle to weave in your ends. Also, we're using a 6mm hook. Now, if you have a different yarn that you want to use, that's no problem. I did go up a hook size to give this a nicer flow. You can use whatever yarn, just go up the recommended hook size. You can use a bulky, thinner, lightweight, whatever yarn. Just choose your yarn, choose your hook, grab all your materials and meet me back here and we will get started on the hearts aligned shawl. All right, so in order to get started on this, we're gonna take a slip knot. We're actually gonna do a backwards slip knot. Our first stitch is going to be a puff stitch, and we're gonna put a lot of yarn overs into the same thing, into the same space. So working a backwards slip knot, instead of taking your working yarn and pulling it through, you're actually taking your tail end and pulling that through. And what that's going to do is once we work into our first chain, it's going to allow us to pull it tightly closed. It's like a magic circle backwards. Okay. So the first thing that we're gonna do is chain 5. Now into your first chain, the first chain that you created, which would be the 5th chain from your hook, we're going to put a puff V-stitch. Let me show you how to do a puff V-stitch. We're going to yarn over and go into the stitch and pull up a loop. Now we should have 3 loops. Yarn over, go into the stitch again, pull up a loop. You should have 5 loops. Now we're going to do that one more time. Yarn over, go into the stitch, and pull up a loop. Now you should have 7 loops on your hook. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now you're going to yarn over and pull through 6 loops. So you're leaving the last loop on your hook, and now you're going to yarn over and pull through those last 2 loops. Okay? Chain 1, and now we're going to do it again. Yarn over, go into that same stitch, pull up a loop. We're doing that 3 times, so yarn over, go in, pull up a loop, yarn over, go in, pull up a loop, pull through all of our loops but the last loop on our hook, and then we'll yarn over and pull through the last one. Now into our first chain, this is our first chain that's created this big hole. We're going to put a treble. Wrap your yarn twice around your hook, go into the stitch, pull up, take 2 off at a time. 1, 2, and 3. And now since we created that backward slip knot, we'll be able to pull from the bottom and it'll close up really nicely. And that is our first row. Okay, now our second row, to start, we're going to chain 4. Every row starts with a chain 4. And into this first stitch, we're going to put a puff V-stitch. Same thing, yarn over, go through and pull up a loop. We're doing that 3 times. 2, 3, pulling through all loops but the last one, and then pulling through 2, chaining 1. 1, 2, 3. Yarn over, pull through all but the last loop, yarn over, and pull through the last 2 loops. Now on top of this puff stitch, we're going to put 1 more puff stitch. So 1, 2, 3, pull through all but the last, and then pull through, chain 1. 1, 2, 3, pull through all but the last, chain 1. Now you should have 2 puff V-stitches. They don't really look like a whole lot yet until we start adding on our puff V's and they turn a little bit more into a heart-like, okay? Our last puff V is going to be into the 4th chain from the previous row. So get your hook into there, pull up a loop, 2, 3, yarn over, pull through all but 1, go through 2, chain 1, do it one more time. And don't forget your treble. Your every row starts and ends with a chain 4 or a treble, and every row also starts and ends with a puff V-stitch. Okay? So those are your 2 setup rows. We've got 1 more row of setup, our 3rd row, and then I'm going to show you your 4th and your 5th row are your repeat rows. It's a 2-row repeat, okay? So chain 4. Turn your work. Remember, every row starts and ends with a chain 4 and a puff stitch. Well, a puff V-stitch. So you get your chain 4, put your puff V-stitch into the first stitch, and now into our next V-stitch. Here's where we're going to start creating the separation of our heart lines. So into the center of this puff V-stitch, we're going to put 3 double crochets. 1, 2, 3. Now into the center of the next puff stitch, we're going to put our next puff V-stitch. And now into our last puff stitch, we're going to put 3 double crochets just like we did on this side. And remember, every row starts and ends with the puff, treble, or chain 4 puff, okay? So finding your 4th chain, we're adding our last puff stitch, our last puff V-stitch.
And now we're going to end it with a treble. And this is what your work should look like. You should have started with chain 4, put a puff V-stitch on top of your first stitch, 3 double crochets into the chain space of your puff stitch, then another puff V into the chain space of the next puff V, 3 double crochets, and then an ending with a puff V-stitch. Okay, so now getting started on the next row. This is going to be row 4. This is the first row of our repeat. 1, 2, 3, 4. Turn your work, puff a V-stitch into the first stitch. Now, into the top of your next puff V-stitch, we're going to put another puff V-stitch. That brings us up to our double crochets, and we will put 1 double crochet on top of each of the next 3 double crochets. So you'll notice when these are our lines of separations for our puff lines, right? Starting out, our 3 double crochets go into the chain 1 space. In every subsequent row, they're going to be on top of the double crochets. Now into the middle, this middle puff V-stitch, we're going to add another puff V-stitch. And now we're up to our double crochets again. And we're going to put 1 double crochet on top of each of the next 3 double crochets. Now we started this row with 2 groups of puff stitches. That's how we're going to end this row. So we're going to put a puff V-stitch on top of our last puff V-stitch. And then we're going to finish out with another puff V-stitch on top of our 4th chain. 1, 2, 3. And then finishing out just like every other row with a treble crochet. And that is your first repeat row complete. So you should be able to start seeing the pattern now. We're starting every row with a puff stitch, and then we're building our heart rows up. And then our double crochet rows up, heart row, double crochet. So you're gonna have them separating each other. And that is just building up from the bottom. Okay, so let's continue on. Let me show you row 5, and then you will be able to be off on your own, repeating rows 4 and rows 5 for as long as you like your size. Chain 4, turn your work, puff stitch into your first stitch, puff V-stitch into your first stitch, now into your next chain space, we're going to start another set of double crochets. So into the top of that V-stitch in your chain space, you'll put 3 double crochets all into the same space. On your next puff V-stitch, we're going to put a puff V-stitch. We're basically just alternating rows, alternating puffs and then double crochets, puffs and then double crochets. So this brings us up to our double crochets, and we're going to put 1 double crochet on top of each of the next 3 double crochets. That brings us up to our middle puff stitch, where we will add a puff stitch, a puff V-stitch. Oh dear heaven, how do I keep getting that wrong this entire filming? That brings us up to our double crochets, and we will double crochet on top of each double crochet. And then we're going to puff stitch again. Puff V-stitch. Now, onto our last puff V-stitch, we're going to put our 3 double crochets. And then into the top of our chain 4 space, well, our chain 4, not the space, don't put it in the space, actually put it in the chain, because it's going to help our bottom stay together. And end with a treble crochet. All right, and that is row 5. So you're going to repeat rows 4 and row 5 until you get to your desired size. You will notice row 4 starts with 2 puff stitches, row 5 starts with 1 puff stitch, and then starts another row of double crochets. All right, so go ahead and repeat and rewatch it as many times as you want. If you have made this creation or any other Jolie Knots creations, find us on Facebook, Jolie Knots Crochet Community, and share with us. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.